Well, thank you all so much for joining us today for the extraordinary life of Jimmy Carter. Throughout his life, Jimmy Carter has found himself in extraordinary circumstances, faced with extraordinary opportunities. Today, we're going to examine Carter's life and civic engagement before, during, and after the presidency through the lens of primary sources of the Carter Library and National Archives to address the question, what is the secret to an extraordinary life? Topics to be discussed include Jimmy Carter's early life, his military career, his political career, and what perhaps he's maybe best known for, his post-presidency humanitarian work. And so today's presentation is led by Joshua Montanari, who's the education specialist and volunteer coordinator at the Jimmy Carter Presidential Library. So all 70 of us or so, let's give a big virtual round of applause to Joshua for joining us here today. And Joshua, the floor is yours. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much, Robert. And just bear with me a second, folks, while I get my screen shared. PowerPoint seems to take a minute to open up. So one moment and we'll get going here. It's great to have everyone with us today from so many different places. I was anticipating a more local to Massachusetts audience. It's great to see people from all over, even someone from Marietta here in Georgia. Great to see you there. We are covering quite a bit, but keep in mind, this is just 1 hour. We could probably talk about Jimmy Carter's life for hours upon hours. So please forgive me if I leave something out or a favorite facet of Carter's life that you may have, but we'll hopefully there's something that everyone will connect with in today's program. So there's just a little visual overview of the life of our 39th president. And Robert mentioned I work at the Jimmy Carter Presidential Library and Museum in Atlanta, Georgia. We are a part of the National Archives and Records Administration. Now, the presidential libraries, they administer our Hoover through George W. Bush. The Barack Obama Library is going to be independently run. President Trump has not decided yet if he's going to have a public-facing presidential library or not and what the management will be, but those are the ones currently administered. Great photograph there. It looks like something depressing, like a funeral. That's actually bringing the founding documents, the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, and Declaration to the National Archives building in 1952. A good reminder about doing primary document research, looking at photographs, looking at what the details of them. Mention those presidential libraries that are administered by the National Archives. There's a kind of one of our brochures you see unfolded there where those are all located. Hopefully you all have one that's somewhat close to you. If not, there's probably a National Archives facility that is close to you. And just quick about presidential libraries. These are outgoing presidents, as mentioned, it's their choice to have a public-facing institution. If they choose to do so, as President Carter did, it is upon them to raise the money for land acquisition, construction. Then typically what happens is management is then handed over to the National Archives and Records Administration. The Carter Presidential Library opened on President Carter's birthday, October 1st in 1986. This one-term president has 40 million pages of written materials, 40,000 museum objects, artifacts, 500,000 photographs, and thousands of hours of audio and videotape. And there you get a small glimpse of our collection as you can see it from our museum floor in our exhibit area. And why do we use these primary sources? Well, they make us question where information comes from, original intent, the context. Naturally, film, audio gives us intangible things to consider we might not get from a still photograph or just text on a paper. And we try to get folks to come in to gain new perspectives. I like to think that's why we have researchers come to our site, is that we're offering them something they do not know. And hopefully we don't answer all their questions. And it prompts further inquiry, maybe at a state historical society or local historical society or state archives, things of that nature. Okay, so we'll go ahead and dive into the extraordinary life of President Carter and try to find out what's the secret. And what, as mentioned, we'll go through his early life, adult life, political life, and post-presidency as much as we can in the time allotted. So we'll begin with the early life. We see a young Jimmy Carter there with his dog Bozo, posing where he grows up in rural southwestern Georgia. Now, maybe the secret to an extraordinary life is having an extraordinary parent, maybe. Miss Lillian Carter made Jimmy the first president born in a hospital or medical facility. The way that happens is because she is volunteering as a nurse at a hospital when she goes into labor with Jimmy. So it's interesting, that gives us a couple an indicator there that the availability of healthcare professionals was scant in Southwest rural Georgia at that time. If we have fully pregnant mothers volunteering at hospitals. So that's how he becomes the first president born in a medical facility. Now, his father did obey the rules of the day in terms of segregation in the public eye anyway. Carter does find out later when his father passes, folks share with him ways that Black neighbors and friends of theirs were helped by his father in secret. However, his mother just did everything in the open. She did not care about Jim Crow laws and the norms of that day. She just cast those to the wind. It created what Jimmy Carter termed a torment of his life, because he was torn between these two authority figures, one telling him to mind the law, the other saying, do what's right, forget the law. Miss Lillian herself had an extraordinary life. Many of you may know she volunteers at the age of 68 to be a nurse in India with the Peace Corps. So that was a 2-year term that she served over there, as everyone else that joins the Peace Corps does. And she supports him throughout his life, particularly on election night, as we see on the right there, the photograph of her reaction upon finding out that her son was elected the 39th president of the United States. So maybe that's a good start to having an extraordinary life, having that lady in your corner. And the house that she raises Jimmy and his brother and 2 sisters in is located in Archer, Georgia, just down the road from Plains, Georgia. It's about a 5-minute drive. And you can tour this home today as it is part of the Jimmy Carter National Historical Park. You can go inside of that house. That was built as a kit ordered from Sears and Roebuck. So his parents do put the house together. However, they do not have running water or electricity. Electricity does come a little bit later during Franklin Roosevelt's term as president with the Rural Electrification Act. So that area of Southwest Georgia was impacted by that. But you can, as mentioned, go here. You can tour the house, the grounds. There is a, I guess you could say, an exemplary portion of the original farm left that they do contract with a local farmer to maintain. You can see some other structures on the property as well, including a clay tennis court his father constructed that Jimmy laments he was typically beaten by his father on, even as he got into his teen years. So that's a great site to go and see and maybe get a sense of what it is that are conditions that a future president grew up around. Now, if you come to our museum, you can see that report card that you see on the right side of your screen on display. That's Jimmy Carter's first grade report card, showing how hard he worked in school. You see a whole lot of A's on there that he was earning after he was up an hour before the sun to do chores at home on the farm, which he often referred to as the Stone Age, saying that the farming then was closer to the Stone Age than modern farming today. But he still gets to school, gets those grades, except for one subject. If you go down the list there of subjects, you'll see one that's not printed, but written in pencil: teeth. Much like his fully pregnant mother volunteering at the hospital, it seems dentists are also in short supply in Southwest Georgia. So it was upon teachers to check their students' mouths for their dental health and hygiene. And you can see they really don't have a lot of specifics to give, just okay, as far as his grade goes there. Young Jimmy Carter was also known to sell peanuts and ice cream. down on Main Street in Plains before school whenever he had spare moments. So he's got an entrepreneurial mind. He's got an academic mind at a very young age. Now moving into his adult life, there we see he and his wife Rosalind on their wedding day. We'll get to that. So Jimmy Carter was inspired to serve in the Navy at a very young age. He had a special bond with his Uncle Tom, who was his mother Lillian's brother. Uncle Tom Gordy was in the Navy, stationed all over the world, would often send Jimmy and the rest of the family letters and postcards from where he was stationed, telling about the things he was seeing outside of Georgia. But unfortunately, in the Second World War, Tom Gordy does become a prisoner of war. And presumed dead. And we'll get to that in a moment. But Carter is resolved to join the Navy because of this influence. He requests a course catalog from the United States Naval Academy even before he's in high school. And later on, he writes a poem in tribute to his Uncle Tom. And we see that in the photograph on the left. This is actually at the Jimmy Carter, this is actually at the Andersonville National Historic Site, very close to where Carter grows up in Georgia. It's maybe about a 20-minute drive from Plains, Georgia. And you see that poem on the wall. And I'm going to do my best to read this out loud for everybody in Carter pentameter. And this will tell the story of the relationship with his Uncle Tom Gordy. In 41, the Japanese took our troops on Guam. Alive or dead, we didn't know. One was my Uncle Tom. He was the Navy boxing champ, my hero with his crown. Now with him gone, his family moved down to our Georgia town. My grandma and my aunts felt Tom was not his wife's, but theirs. She could feel the coolness, but stayed on to join their prayers. What bound them all together was the hope and faith and dread. When 2 years passed, the dispatch came. My Uncle Tom was dead. His wife and kids moved back out west to start their lives again. And after Tom was gone 3 years, she wed a family friend. The end of the war brought startling news. Tom Gordy was alive. For years, he had been digging coal deep in a mountainside. The women took the feeble Tom and smothered him with care. He never would tell anyone what happened over there. Tom Gordy soon regained some strength and craved a normal life, but mother and sisters told him lies about his absent wife. Betraying him, Tom wanted her, but couldn't figure how to bring her back or overcome her second marriage vow. He got 4 years back pay and made Commander USN. It didn't take him long to find a woman's love again. Tom closed the past except when his 3 children came to stay. When I would mention his first wife, he'd always turn away. Once my submarine tied up where she lived with her kin, I went to visit them, afraid they wouldn't let me in. But all the folks they knew were called when I first gave my name. All night we danced and sang because at least Tom's nephew came. And so that is published in one of Carter's many, many books that he's written in his life, over 30. So you see, there was a very unfortunate situation, and I don't believe that was an isolated one. In that conflict or any other major U.S. conflicts, when you have prisoners of war who are presumed dead and are then found that in many cases they come to find life has moved on without them. Now, a little bit more about Jimmy Carter and his path to the Navy. He graduates Plains High School in 1941. That high school is now the visitor center and museum of the Jimmy Carter National Historical Park that you can visit in Plains, Georgia. He attends Georgia Southwestern College down the road in Americus for 1 year. He studies mathematics, then at the Georgia Institute of Technology for 1 year to qualify for the United States Naval Academy in Annapolis, Maryland, where he receives his appointment in 1943. Now, he is always listed as the class of 1947, but he is put on a 3-year accelerated program. He actually graduates in 1946. And once he graduates, he marries Rosalind Carter, who had actually turned down his first wedding proposal because she had promised her father she would finish college before she got married, which she does, after which she accepts his proposal at that point. You can see them on their wedding day. Now, in the museum, we don't have those original clothing pieces that they wore, but we do have reproductions that you can see. We get a lot of comments that Mrs. Carter looks like a little Debbie when she's in that outfit on her wedding day. So upon graduating, he's assigned to the Naval Base in Norfolk, Virginia, where they move to begin their life together. Now, he's in the Navy from 1946 to 1953. This is a part of Carter's life not a lot of folks are familiar with. He serves on surface ships and diesel-electric submarines in both the Atlantic and Pacific fleets. Rosalind Carter loved the fact that they got to leave Georgia and travel outside of it and see new places, something she hadn't had a lot of exposure to. Carter then attends U.S. Navy Submarine School, and I believe that's in Connecticut, studying nuclear reactor technology and nuclear physics. Does that make Carter a bona fide nuclear physicist? Not quite. He's more on the mechanical applications of things. He does become the senior officer on USS K-1, a nuclear-powered submarine. We see him there in command on that vessel in the photograph displayed here. He's the one behind the two gentlemen seated there, in case you're not quite sure. His commander, once he's in the nuclear program, is Admiral Rickover, Hyman Rickover. Someone Carter has said that second to his own father has had more effect on his life than any other man. Now we see him here later when Carter is president. I think he's mentioned that Hyman Rickover told him privately, don't go thinking I'm going to salute you now that you're commander in chief. But of course he would respect that decorum. So Mr. Rickover was extremely hard on Carter, would constantly drill them, constantly, I would say, apply psychological pressure to them to test their resolve in the situations for the things that they were being trained to do in the military. And I think that's why Carter had so many invaluable lessons from this man. Now in the picture we see, that's Carter, Rickover, and the first Secretary of Energy, James Schlesinger. You may or may not know that Carter forms the Department of Energy, and that is its first secretary there on the right. But that will be a topic for my next presentation. So that training comes in handy when we have the first nuclear meltdown in world history at Chalk River Laboratories in Ottawa, Canada in 1952. Radioactive material is released there. And what Carter's role is leading a team of 23 personnel to go in and repair that reactor. The way they do this is setting up a copy of that reactor in an adjacent tennis court and practicing, because they have to work in 90-second increments. At least that was the standard at that time. Now, Carter and his team were measured after they performed this task, which they are successful. That reactor is up and running again 2 years later. But when he's given urinalysis tests, he's still coming up positive for radiation more than 6 months later. And it's determined that he and his men absorbed about 1.5 years worth of radiation in each of those 90-second increments. So something they were still figuring out at the time. I like to think it's a great comic book hero origin story. And that's how President Carter's had such amazing longevity and endurance in his life, was from his experiences at Chalk River. But maybe somebody in Marvel will pick that up for me. So he gets out of the military in the 50s after his father's passing. His father passes from pancreatic cancer. Actually, that is the disease that would take the rest of his immediate family, with the exception of his mother. His brother Billy, his two sisters would both die of pancreatic cancer. So he feels it's upon him to take up the reins of the family business. I believe he is still in the reserves, Navy reserves, after 1953, but he's obviously out of active duty. But he jumps back into that family business, which is very tough at first. He's been away a while. In fact, he and Rosalind Carter are living in public housing when they move back to Georgia. They only make $250 profit their first year. But Carter turns the business around as he becomes civically engaged in his community. He's the head of all Lions clubs in Georgia. He's on the Sumter County School Board. He's on the library board, and he also works with Future Farmers of America. And we believe it's that civic engagement that inspires him to enter politics, which brings us to his political life from 1963 through 1981. We see a picture of the White House on a wintry day in 1977. In fact, that's 5 days before Jimmy Carter is inaugurated as our 39th president. So he begins at the local level. So Jimmy Carter runs for Georgia State Senator in 1963. He initially is declared the loser of this election. A local journalist does a little digging and uncovers tangible evidence that this was a fraudulent election. In other words, they did find that people who were in the local cemetery somehow made it out to vote for his opponent on that day. The difference was enough to propel Carter to win that local election. And it's interesting to posit, what if that journalist had not done their due diligence and Carter had not urged them to pursue that? Maybe we would just have Jimmy Carter, the peanut farmer, and most of us would not have any awareness of it. But that's not what happens. He is elected as a Georgia State Senator. He serves 2 terms in that capacity. He then runs for Georgia governor in 1966, as we see him doing on the right-hand side there, going out, meeting people, pressing them in the flesh. He loses in 1966 to a man named Lester Maddox, who we'll talk about in a moment. He tries again in 1970. He is successful. At that time in Georgia, you could only serve 1 term as governor. So he does have a different opponent in 1970. But he's a stark contrast to his predecessor, Lester Maddox. He owned a restaurant in Atlanta, Georgia, and was known for brandishing an axe handle to physically threaten any African-American patrons that came into his restaurant post desegregation. And eventually he closes that restaurant rather than comply with the law and permit integration at that facility. So Jimmy Carter is a part of that new wave of what they called anti-racist Democrats winning public office in the southeastern U.S. in the 1970s. I believe the governorships in Arkansas, South Carolina, Florida also saw similar results in the early 1970s. But here we're just going to play a very short clip. It's about 1.5 minutes from Jimmy Carter's inaugural address as governor of Georgia.
At the end of a long campaign, I believe I know our people of this state as well as anyone could. Based on this knowledge of Georgians, North and South, rural and urban, liberal and conservative, I say to you quite frankly that the time for racial discrimination is over. Our people have already made this major and difficult decision, but we cannot underestimate the challenge of hundreds of minor decisions yet to be made. Our inherent human charity and our religious beliefs will be taxed to the limit. No poor, rural, weak, or black person should ever have to bear the additional burden of being deprived of the opportunity of an education, a job, or simple justice.
And so that was a huge shift, a catalytic shift in politics. And many people believe Jimmy Carter was a part of that we saw it happen over the 1970s and 80s, where there was previously the southeastern United States was a Democratic stronghold, but then we see people migrating to the Republican Party, and that kind of inverts the political map to the point of where it more or less has been for the last 30 to 40 years. After the governorship of Georgia, he wants to keep ascending up the ladder to have more and more opportunities for service. That's what seems to be what drives Jimmy Carter, is having a wider outlet or a bigger audience to serve. So he does decide to run for president in 1976, and no one is projecting him to win this election, more or less even finish in the top three. But he has a very dedicated core of volunteers known as the Peanut Brigade that helped propel him to the White House. And that includes his friends, family, neighbors. His own immediate family were typically each traveling in a different state, making stops to campaign for Jimmy. Even his daughter, Amy, would make campaign stops, speaking to kids and adults alike. And we do have a good number of or objects in our exhibit gallery from the Peanut Brigade, hand-sewn clothing and apparel, frisbees, signs, pennants like you see them waving there. In fact, I would say the most often donated items people try to donate to us are things from the campaign. And oftentimes people tell us, oh, I was part of the Peanut Brigade. But however, our collection is fully brimming with campaign materials from 76 and 80. So typically I do try to accept some here and there for educational purposes or for tactile purposes for visually impaired people so they can feel and touch something. But I would just advise anyone, if you're thinking of trying to donate campaign materials to the library, there's a good chance we might tell you we're good on that, because we do get quite a few of those donations. Maybe the secret to that extraordinary life was building new relationships. We see how Carter worked with people in his community to get his farming business back up to the level that his father had run it at, and with all that various civic engagement. Well, something he does when he gets to the presidency is he really builds on the work of his predecessors, particularly Nixon and Ford, his two immediate predecessors. Now, we often hear Nixon goes to China. So Richard Nixon does start that conversation with Communist China about trying to open up relations between our nations. Gerald Ford continues that conversation, but it's actually Jimmy Carter who officially establishes diplomatic relations with China. Now, it's about 3 years ago, I brought my interns along down to Plains, Georgia. We were visiting there with interns of the Carter Center, who we share a campus with, and we had an audience with President Carter that day. And at one point, one of the students asked President Carter what his most significant accomplishment as president was. And I'm waiting for him to say the Camp David Accords, the Panama Canal treaties, getting all of the 52 hostages from Iran home safely. But his response, without blinking, was establishing diplomatic relations with China. So that's something I witnessed firsthand, heard him say himself. So that's something I highly encourage folks to look more into that topic, because again, it's one most people don't think about with Jimmy Carter. So please look into that more. And speaking of diplomatic relations, so we mentioned the Camp David Accords, and maybe that secret is maybe not so much something for yourself, but helping others have peace. Now, the Camp David Accords were unprecedented as far as a United States president leveraging that influence to get an agreement between two other nations. This was something that had been tried in preceding administrations, but really what's pushing this is I'm guessing we might have some folks who were actually alive in the 70s and remember circumstances in our nation at that time. When we have this almost endless decades of war between Israel and its Arab neighbors, that does begin to hit home for us. Through those conflicts, the United States is providing support to Israel. After the conflicts in, I believe, 1970, which ends in 1973 between those nations, we have the Arab oil embargo, which is put on the United States for their support of Israel. And that sends energy prices skyrocketing. It is lifted a little bit later in the Ford administration. But the damage is kind of done. That ripples in society and into the financial sectors they hang around for a bit. So this becomes a pressing matter in the Carter administration to resolve those conflicts, to stop the fluctuations in energy prices in the global markets. This is a 13-day undertaking. But when you really stop and think about it, does any president get to say, for the next 2 weeks, this is the thing I'm doing? No, they really don't. So they went into this thinking this is just going to be a weekend, and we'll see if we can get it, maybe consensus on 1 or 2 issues. But Carter really presses it. Initially, he goes in just as an arbitrator. He sees that these two sides are never going to meet eye to eye without intervention from a third party. So he does transform the U.S.'s role and becomes an active participant, puts forth, at great risk, mind you, a United States proposal for peace. Now, when he's garnered support from senators in Congress, who he's going to need to sign off on any treaty, he's told them, we're not going to be making the proposals. I'm just there to referee. So he does renege on that. It does work. It is a calculated risk that pays off in the end, because they do come to an agreement that ends those more than 40 years of war. It establishes diplomatic relations between Egypt and Israel and returns the Sinai Peninsula to Egypt. And this has been a lasting peace that's still intact today. But how did it happen? 12 days of failure and then sudden success on the 13th day. This photograph may be the moment that happens, but we're going to bring another perspective to it to supplement this photograph. We're going to have some of Carter's own words about what happened in that interaction that made what seemed like a failure at Camp David into a success.
The last day was a turning point because we thought we had failed. And we were getting ready to leave Camp David in failure and go back to Washington and announce that we had not been successful. And Prime Minister Begin asked me if I would sign a photograph for his 8 grandchildren of me and Begin and Sadat. And I agreed to do it. And my secretary, whose name was Susan Clow, got the names of Begin's 8 grandchildren from Israel. She called over there and got their names. So instead of saying best wishes, Jimmy Carter, I said with love and best wishes to, and I put down his grandchild's name and I signed it. And I took it over to his cabin to tell him goodbye. And when he opened the door, he was very angry with me. And he said, "Good afternoon, Mr. President." He was always very proper. And I said, "Good afternoon, Mr. Prime Minister. I'm sorry we hadn't been successful. I brought the photographs you asked for." And I gave the photographs to him. And he turned around and said, "Thank you, sir." And then he looked down at the photographs. And he read out loud, "Love and best wishes to," and said, he read his grandchild's name. And he put that over in the back and he read the next one's name. And he read the third one's name. And his chin began to quiver and tears ran down his cheeks. And mine too. And he said on the face, "Why don't we try one more time?"
So we see there that very personal form of diplomacy is what helps Carter prevail. Now, at the Camp David, of course, it should be noted, there had already been a strong relationship established with Egypt's President Anwar Sadat. And that relationship went back to the Nixon administration. But Menachem Begin had just come into office in Israel when Carter had came into office. And Begin was really the one holding all the cards in those talks. And now had Gerald Ford succeeded in maintaining the presidency, perhaps he would have had this summit. Maybe he would have been successful as well. We never know, but it does seem like Jimmy Carter was the right person at the right time for those talks to be a success.
The last day.
Okay. So Jimmy Carter maybe has an extraordinary life because of his affinity for protecting public lands, forests, wildlife. As governor of Georgia, he vetoed quite a few bills to drain swamplands and coastlands for construction, whether that was residential, industrial. He felt that it was his job as governor to keep the Georgia environment intact. Well, as president, he more or less does the same. He protects more than 100 million acres of federal public lands in his 4 years as president, which included 34 new national monuments, parks, forests, wildlife refuges. Now, most of that comes in a landmark bill, the Alaska National Interest Lands Conservation Act of 1980, or ANILCA. It is the most significant piece of conservation legislation in our nation's history, primarily affecting Alaska, as its name implies. But it did many other things. Again, that was also a big part of Carter's energy plan, because we were trying to get sources from wherever we could. Many of them were in Alaska, but we had to get through a lot of administrative red tape to finalize things like transportation corridors, mining, things of that nature. So it was all a big part of it. For his work in public lands later in 2016, the National Park Service made him an honorary National Park Ranger in his hometown of Plains, Georgia, where Jimmy Carter National Historical Park is. And I have heard President Carter remark on multiple occasions how very proud he is of his National Park Ranger flat hat and his status within that agency. So Jimmy Carter runs for re-election in 1980. I think we all know he loses that election to Ronald Reagan, who becomes the 40th president of the United States. Jimmy Carter is a very young former president, similar in age, I would say, to Barack Obama in their mid 50s. So he's got quite a bit left ahead of him. Now, while he is in office, the farm is put into a trust. Brother Billy's running that. Things aren't run quite so well. When they get out, there's about $1.5 million of debt. So the Carters immediately, both of Rosalind and Jimmy, begin writing books. And from the proceeds of those books, they are able to get out of their debt, and they then establish the Carter Center, which is a nonprofit organization that the Carter Library shares a campus with here in Atlanta, Georgia. But better than me tell you what they do, I am just going to play you their video to let them tell you what they do. I know a lot of folks associate President Carter with Habitat for Humanity, which he is still very much, they are involved in and connected with. But that's the tip of the iceberg of what the Carters have been doing since they've left Washington. So here's a taste of what they've been up to.
There are more than 7 billion faces on Earth, some full of hope and dreams, others empty with despair, constrained by barriers that keep them from healthy and productive lives. The Carter Center works to tear down those barriers and create a world where everyone has a chance to live in peace and enjoy basic human rights.
We are willing to take a chance that we might fail if we believe that the ultimate goal is worthwhile, worth our effort, and worth an investment in people who have been neglected by others. She gets three tablets.
The Carter Center has worked in over 80 countries to advance peace and fight devastating diseases.
Salam alaikum.
Over the years, the center has helped improve relations among nations and has worked to promote human rights, resolve conflicts, and strengthen democracies.
Did you vote? Yes. Congratulations.
The center has observed more than 100 elections in countries in Asia, Africa, and the Americas. As a result, leaders are held accountable to the people in places that have never had free and fair elections. The Carter Center is a leader in fighting neglected diseases like guinea worm, river blindness, trachoma, and lymphatic filariasis. These are gone from the developed world, but they still afflict some of the poorest people on earth.
These diseases are all preventable. If the folks are just given a chance to know what they can do to improve their own lives, then they can transform their own lives into an opportunity for hope and self-respect and anticipation of a better future.
The center also strives to improve access to mental health care and reduce stigma and discrimination against those with mental illnesses.
So today is the last day that you will distribute here.
The people of the Carter Center work for peace, fight disease, and most importantly, bring hope to those who never had it before.
We were the poorest, most isolated people in the world. And often, if we weren't there, there would be nobody to help them.
The Carter Center works where the need is greatest to improve the lives of the poor, the disadvantaged, and those who have no voice.
Oops, sorry, I have to go back out. Sorry about the little technical hiccup there. But you see what the Carters have been involved in addition to Habitat for Humanity, which I think just a couple of years ago, President Carter had taken a nasty fall and was scheduled to build a house in Nashville the next day, which he still showed up for. And you could see him with the bruise on his face and bandage, but he still showed up for the job. But the impact they've had is just indescribable, particularly with tropical diseases. They mentioned guinea worm in that video, something that comes from people not having access to clean water. Now, when the Carter Center began their guinea worm eradication program, we have millions of people, millions worldwide afflicted with that. Through their work of providing just basic education, basic medical necessities, those millions are now, I believe it's less than 20. And many of that was a recent resurgence. I think at one point they were at less than 10. And if that disease is in fact eradicated, it would only be the second disease in human history eradicated behind smallpox. Now, naturally, with a life of great service comes some notable awards. Now, many folks thought that Jimmy Carter should have received the Nobel Peace Prize along with Anwar Sadat and Menachem Begin for the Camp David Accords. He does not get it then, but he is awarded it in 2002 for his lifetime of work, particularly that with the Carter Center. He and Rosalind are both also awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom by President Bill Clinton, who commented that they have done more good things for more people in more places than any other couple on the face of the earth. Also, you will find in our exhibit area, as those other two items, we see that plaque with the weapon from Nicaragua. That was from an election monitoring trip they did there. And in other words, the message was violence typically was a big factor in their elections because of the intervention of the Carter Center. They did not experience that. And this humanitarian work does not go without controversy. You might have noticed in that video, Carter meeting with Un in North Korea, meeting with Fidel Castro. At the time he's doing these things, these are things presidents aren't doing. Himself and pretty much any president from Eisenhower, Ford himself included, were sworn enemies of Fidel Castro, would not talk openly with the North Korean regime, but he felt that in his former presidency, he was in a position to do so. And I do think that those trips definitely bore fruit. I mean, it has become normalized to engage with world leaders that we have serious disagreements about. We have seen relations thaw with Cuba. President Trump made a trip to North Korea. Perhaps Carter was a big factor in those things. Excuse me. But maybe more than anything, Carter's longevity has provided him this extraordinary life, this time to do all of these extraordinary things. We might remember he was diagnosed with brain cancer at 92, was not expected to live. He was saying his goodbyes, but he does have a full recovery, maybe from that incident at Chalk River. We don't know. But he is officially the longest living president in U.S. history. He did surpass George H.W. Bush for that honor. And he and Rosalind are the longest married presidential couple. They got married in 1946, still together today. I was very fortunate at one point to have an audience with Mrs. Carter, me and about 5 or 6 of my colleagues when we visited Plains. I was getting ready to get married at that point. I asked Mrs. Carter if she had any advice for me. You know, she told me, so, well, me and Jimmy love to read the Bible together. We actually try to read it in Spanish to keep up on our foreign language skills. We fish together, take trips together, she said, but make sure you get away from each other. So I try to take that to heart. My wife was happy to hear that advice. So a little word to the wise for any married folks out there: get away from each other from time to time. But the photograph we're seeing there, that is from their 75th wedding anniversary party that they had in Plains last year. Another president came, Bill Clinton, his wife, former senator, former first lady, former secretary of state, former presidential candidate Hillary Clinton came to see them there for that celebration, along with about 200 other people. So again, getting back to what we mentioned at the beginning, Jimmy Carter has just had this extraordinary life full of extraordinary opportunities. Now, I think this Carter quote, which seems it's a bit of a tongue twister, really sums up Jimmy's secret to have an extraordinary life. He says, I have one life and one chance to make it count for something. My faith demands that I do whatever I can, wherever I am, whenever I can, for as long as I can, with whatever I have, to try and make a difference. And I think it's that last part, make a difference. I think maybe if we follow that formula, the rest will follow. And the photograph that we see on the screen here, this was Jimmy Carter greeting residents of the South Bronx in October of 1977. You may or may not know the Bronx were essentially on fire for most of the 1970s. And Jimmy Carter made a point to stop and speak with residents there when he had a previous engagement at the United Nations building that day. But again, I think that moment spoke to the quote that we see here on the screen, that he had the time, so he made the time to go meet with those folks and hear about what they were going through to try to resolve that problem. But that is the end of my presentation. So I thank you so much for being here with me today. And I believe we have some time for some Q&A with folks, or even if you just have an experience or story you want to share. So let me exit out of my screen and stop sharing. And
great. Yeah, Joshua,
time for some interaction here.
Yeah, excellent. Well, you do that. So I do have some questions, and if we have time, I'll certainly read some of the comments. But let me get to the questions first. James asks, did President Carter ever win the Nobel Peace Prize?
Yes, so as I mentioned in the presentation, he wins the Nobel Peace Prize in 2002. Now, here's a fact you might not know. So we have that on display in our museum here in Atlanta, Georgia. There is another Nobel Peace Prize located in Atlanta, Georgia. Can anyone put in the chat who won that prize? Let's see, a real famous person, and a native of Atlanta, Georgia. Worked for peace and equality. All right, I see MLK, there it is. So Martin Luther King wins the Nobel Peace Prize. His prize is located at the King Center, which is just 1.2 miles from the Carter Library, making these two Nobel Peace Prizes the most closely geographically located Nobel Peace Prizes on the face of the earth. And the other presidents who have won the Nobel Peace Prize all have a connection to Georgia. Teddy Roosevelt's, I believe his wife's family, second wife's family from Georgia. Woodrow Wilson spent his summers in Augusta, Georgia. Barack Obama's wife, Michelle's family I believe, strong connections there in Georgia. So apparently, if you're from Georgia and you make it to the White House, there's a really good chance you're going to get the Nobel Peace Prize. Okay, what other questions do we have here?
An anonymous attendee asks, who did Carter run against in the 1976 Democratic primary?
Oh, it was actually a really crowded field that year. I know Paul Tsongas, I believe, was in there. Mondale himself, I believe, had one point put his hat in the ring. Jerry Brown, California. Seems like he was in a lot of different presidential races. He really had some endurance. I think Cecil Andrews as well. So I don't know the comprehensive list, but I do know, I think there was at least 9 to 12 other candidates in that field. And it should be noted that it's Carter. I mean, these seem to be kind of becoming undone right now, but he created that tradition of the primaries in New Hampshire and Iowa being litmus tests. Because at that point, most candidates weren't going to all corners of the country. They were more or less going where the big electoral votes were. But it's Carter and the Peanut Brigade that really go to every corner of the nation. And it's those states where he came back as the underdog to win that made us then take a look at what's happening in New Hampshire, Iowa, as an indicator for how the rest of the race will go. So I'm sorry I don't have the complete list of that for you. I'm sure that's a quick, easy Google search, but I did know a couple of people. Just to say it was a crowded field, I know that much.
Rosamond asks, we never hear anything about Amy. Is the family close?
The family is very close. We don't hear from Amy because she prefers to lead a very private life. It may occur to folks that she was really the last White House child that was fully in the spotlight. We see beginning with Chelsea Clinton, then continuing with the Bush daughters and the Obama daughters, then Barron Trump, that we keep presidential kids out of the limelight, and they're kind of hands off as far as the press and everything else goes. But Amy Carter, she had reporters waiting every day when they took her to school, because she did attend a public school in DC. I mean, there's so much documentation of Amy Carter. In fact, I have a whole program about Amy Carter because of how much exposure she got. But what I can tell you is that she is a teacher, and she does live in the metro Atlanta area. And she's married with children. And that's all I can tell you, because that's all I know, because she does lead a private life. And most folks don't realize the Carters have 3 sons, but they were all essentially adults when Carter gets to the White House. In Jimmy Carter's own words, Amy was a 12-year negotiation with Rosalynn. So she came a little later, and Amy's commented that she basically got to grow up with 4 dads because her brothers were all of adult age, more or less, when she's born.
Joyce says, wonderful presentation. President Carter is a bright spot in our U.S. history. Her question is, as new presidents assume office, do former presidents like Jimmy Carter offer their services to that president? For example, how to manage staff, how to manage divisive politics with other branches of government, how to manage a crisis, etc., or do they wait to be asked?
I think that's probably on a case-by-case basis. I know there is what they call the former President's Club, where living presidents do gather on occasion. I think I would have to say that Jimmy Carter has offered his services to all succeeding presidents since him. I would say recently during the Trump administration, when might know that President Trump had a bone to pick with China. Again, it's Jimmy Carter establishes diplomatic relations with China, and I do know that he and President Trump did speak on the subject of China directly with each other. Now, having said that, I know President Carter's gotten himself in a little bit of hot water with his successors, with perhaps statements he's made or actions he's taken, like meeting with Fidel Castro or going to North Korea. But I do think his relation is amicable between them. And I can't see Jimmy Carter not refusing any of his successors' requests for assistance or insights into their job.
Let's see here. Mike says, so this is a question. As I recall, a knock on the Carter administration was that Jimmy Carter tried to do too much himself and didn't delegate well. Do you have any comments and insights on that criticism?
Well, what I can say to that is we saw how well Jimmy Carter mobilized in Georgia. And he worked up through, with civic engagement at the local level, then serving as a state senator, governor. Now, when he gets to Washington, he brings Georgia with him. In fact, his staff was referred to as the Georgia Mafia. And I think a lot of historians would agree that perhaps that hurt him a little bit in the fact that this was Washington, not Georgia. And then, this is a different city. This is a different game altogether. And possibly that hindered him. But on the other hand, Jimmy Carter did have an extremely high success rate in getting his legislation he proposed passed by Congress. And I think, like any other president, you inherit the work of your successors. Jimmy Carter is at a time when our nation was still healing from Vietnam. He's handed stagflation that's still lingering from the Arab oil embargo. It's not Carter who I don't think who had set up the pre-revolutionary regime in Iran that then leads to the Iranian hostage crisis. His presidency is really at a crossroads of things culminating, I think. But I think it's not that he didn't delegate. I think it's that he wasn't afraid to meet things head on, that he wasn't afraid to take on hard issues and didn't figuratively kick the can to the next administration. We see him taking on the energy crisis creates, despite him being, a conservative Democrat, so to speak. He expands the government, creates the Department of Education, creates the Department of Energy. He has to deal, he also has the 3 Mile Island disaster while he's trying to promote nuclear energy. So, there are a lot of things that happen in the Carter administration out of his control. But it possibly could be that heavier reliance on people he already knew, as opposed to branching out and creating new relationships in Washington, that could have hindered him in some way. But I'll leave that to the other historians to decide. To everyone to decide. I'd say look at the primary sources, decide for yourself.
So I'm going to give you 2 or 3 more questions, Joshua, and then we're going to wrap it up. Wendy asks, what exactly does he do or did? I'm sorry, let me start over. What exactly did Jimmy Carter do to ensure free and fair elections in other countries?
So what they do there is actually monitor the elections. I think just the presence of the Carter Center, being some, in another, in an African nation or a Central American nation, South American nation, because they've done this all over the world. Just the presence, I think, is a deterrent to what they typically, what those people would experience, whether it's election fraud or violence from one political faction against another. But they have a comprehensive observation of them. They do submit reports afterwards. In many cases, they've found, they've submitted reports to governments. Yeah, your election is riddled with fraud, riddled with coercion, interference, things of that nature. So it's physically being there on the ground. And then also part of that is education to people, like educating people about their civic rights and their civic liberties in those nations, what they can do, what they can't do, how to register to vote, and organizing people to be civically active in those countries in the face of coercion and potential violence. So that's really what they've been doing on the ground there. But I would highly recommend to go to the Carter Center's website, cartercenter.org, and you can read information about their election monitoring programs and hear it from them.
Anne in the Q&A asks, what caused the oil and gas shortages during his presidency, and what did he do? Now, Joshua, I don't want you to answer, and Anne, I'm going to tease that Joshua's coming back. It's going to be a little while. He's back in August, on Tuesday, August 23rd at 2 o'clock, and he'll be talking about just this topic, the energy crisis of the 1970s and Jimmy Carter's response. So you'll get information in that in the email tomorrow with registration details. But let's end, I think, appropriately with Joyce's question. How do you feel that President Carter's presidency will be remembered?
Well, I think most of us would have a consensus and agree that the lenses are getting a little more rose-colored, that people are looking back at his presidency with more positive feelings associated with it. I think people look at his statesmanship as a big part of it, and personal character, I think. As I mentioned, it was a lot of things that were culminating at that time that may or may not have been any of his own doing, like stagflation, the energy crisis. And we also have to remember, again, put ourselves, if we weren't alive at that time, let's put ourselves back into those analog shoes of people in the 70s, where we do not have 24 hours news stations hitting us constantly. We don't have social media, we don't have the internet, so we don't have social media constantly inundating us with things. So all people know is what they're reading on the newspaper and what they're hearing from Walter Cronkite, in the evening news. And so I guess you could say, for lack of a better term, a lot of Americans did not have multiple perspectives at that point. And so all they knew was that they were paying more at the pump. They were paying more for everything because prices are fueled by fuel. So that's what people knew. Their pocketbooks were getting hit. They knew that we had hostages in Iran that for one reason or another we couldn't resolve. I mean, although it is President Carter that does resolve the Iranian hostage crisis. Again, a lot of people think Ronald Reagan got into office and magically it was over. No, Carter arranges for the release of those hostages. They fly out of Iran the moment Ronald Reagan is inaugurated as president. That was the condition. So I think people have more facts in place now. And I think they've also had different life experiences since the 1970s that have changed their perspectives on the Carter administration. So I do think people are going to remember him more positively than, let's say, during the 1980 election. And they are going to recognize his strengths and recognize his character and see more clearly what exactly he was up against and what tools he had to try to solve those problems for our nation. So I do think there's going to be more shine on his penny, I think, in the coming years.
More shine on his penny. I'm going to use that. I like that. So Joshua, do you have any last words for the group before we wrap up?
Yeah. So, we had with the questions that folks have posited to me, remind me to encourage folks, go out and do your research, be your own historian. You have primary sources available from the National Archives, presidential libraries, your state archives, your local historical societies, your public libraries like the Tewksbury Library. Go out, dig into it, make up your own mind about things. Don't let me do that for you. Don't let the news anchors do that for you, the journalists do that for you, your neighbor do that for you, your family members. Go out and figure it out for yourself. Go out and take some time to dig into these things. That's a part of democracy, is having transparency. It's not perfect. Of course, there's still things withheld from us, but it's pretty darn close. So go out and take advantage of that. I really think it's one of the great essences of being American, is that we have that access to these documents to see what our government is up to or has been up to. And then we make up our own mind.
Well, great advice, Joshua. That's a good note to end on. Folks, look for an email from me tomorrow with a link to a feedback survey, a link to this recording, and information about other upcoming presidential library and presidential related programs we have planned this summer. So thank you all so much, and I hope everyone enjoys the rest of their day. Thanks again, Joshua.
Very welcome. Looking forward to coming back.
Great. We'll see you in a couple months. Bye-bye.